This is World Awakenings, the fast track to enlightenment with your host, Carl Gruber. World Awakenings is a podcast dedicated to opening your mind, your heart, and your eyes to the fact that the world's population is now, more than ever, awakening to all things spiritual, metaphysical, and enlightening, and just how they play an all-important role in our daily life. So join Carl on this enlightening experience as he interviews metaphysical and spiritual experts to discuss, debate, and delve deeply into the hows and whys of this worldwide awakening.
You've seen and read my 3 Pillars ebook, and now I'm proud to announce my new book, True Spirituality and the Law of Attraction, a beautiful symbiotic relationship, and it's now out and ready for reading. This new book of mine is a full-length version of the teachings of the 3 Pillars, and in it I show you how to walk in the integrity of eternal and universal laws, in step with the law of attraction to consistently create the life you desire. Now, if you've ever wondered just why you can't consistently manifest all the good, loving, abundant, healthy, and happy things you desire, my new book, True Spirituality and the Law of Attraction, will reveal the key in how to do just that. Plus, help you build a rock-solid personal foundation that will stand strong for the ages. Get your copy today. My new book, True Spirituality and the Law of Attraction, a beautiful symbiotic relationship by Carl Gruber. Available now in ebook and paperback on Amazon.com. Hey, welcome friends to the show World Awakenings, a fast track to enlightenment. I am your host, Carl Gruber. Now, since 2018, this show is your home for exploring all things spiritual, metaphysical, and enlightening. Now, we've had some truly amazing and incredible guests over the years as we continue to take a deep dive into learning about and understanding all things beyond the veil of the 3D world. Now, today's show, episode number 184, features a guest that I've had on this show 6 years ago. Back in 2018, it was actually my second real guest on this show, and I didn't even do video. It was all audio at that time. And I'm talking about the brilliant teacher, Brendan D. Murphy. Brendan, originally from Australia, now living in Mexico, and I'll do a quick bio for Brendan here. He is a self-described freedom hacker and truth addict. In 2012, he published his gargantuan treatise called The Grand Illusion, a synthesis of science and spirituality, Book 1. Now, Brendan is also the host of the popular podcast Truthiverse, which may be one of the only true voices on the planet that has a sane and clear mission on finding out what the real truth is here in the 3D realm on Earth. And hey, by the way, he's a heck of a guitarist too, so I hope he brought his guitar. So welcome, Brendan, man. It's only been 6 years. Welcome back to World Awakenings.
It's good to be back, man. I appreciate it, and it's good to connect again.
Well, I have to be honest, I'm hundreds of years older than you, but man, you just fascinate the heck out of me. And I found your book back in a used bookstore in Columbus, Ohio in 2018. And I said this book literally fell out of the shelf into my hands and said, The Grand Illusion, a synthesis of science and spirituality. I go, huh? Well, I grabbed a hold of this book. I mean, how many pages long is this thing?
I think the updated version was 665.
Yeah, that's all. And so I spent the entire winter of 2018 reading this. I remember sitting in the laundromat doing laundry and highlighting all this stuff in there, and just amazing treatise. And you were how old when you wrote this book?
I finally got to publish it when I was 29.
29, yeah. And how long did it take you to write it?
Somewhere between 5 and 6 years in the end.
Well, and that's understandable. A book that long and the research and the depth that you went into merging science and spirituality was incredible. Where did the impetus to get started? If I remember our first conversation 6 years ago, we both had read this book called The Holographic Universe, right? And that was kind of a starting point for you.
That was the starting point. Yeah, that was it. Absolutely. Yep. So, I was 20 at the time. My brother, 3 years younger than me, he was at school and he came home one day. There was a guy who'd come to school to give a talk and he mentioned this book. And for some reason, that stuck with him and he felt compelled to tell me about it. So he came home. I was like, "Oh, okay, that sounds interesting." And I did nothing about it for 6 months. And then, 6 months later, the curiosity had got to me. So I finally went got my hands on it, and that was the beginning of the end and the end of the beginning, and that was what defined the last 21 years of my life, really.
Well, and you have just picked up and ran with that book, the what you have created. I mean, you have a wide audience. You're very, very visible on all social media, your website. You have an incredible podcast called Truthiverse. And I have to say that, and I think I mentioned this in the intro, your Truthiverse is probably one of the only sane and clear investigations into what the real truth of the world is. And when did you start that, and what motivated you to do that yourself?
Well, the reason I started that, I used to do a podcast with Amy called, we had a platform called Global Freedom Movement years ago. And so we used to do that together. And then we stopped. We were house sitting, as you know, we were house sitting, ended up for 3 years. And while we were doing that, we couldn't really function properly. We couldn't keep things going. So I got back on the horse after what I like to call Clownvid 19 kicked off. Um, and that was the impetus because I was just watching. I realized that that particular scam was not going away and that it was something, big. I was like, well, I've got to talk about this. I'm going to have some people on who are experts to, dismantle this nonsense. So that was why I started podcasting again, really. So yes, since the beginning of the scamdemic, more or less.
Yeah, and I mentioned you before we came on that I generally in this show I stick to spirituality, metaphysics, and enlightenment, and I don't mind talking about those, and I would like to dive down a little deeper in that. But going back to your book for a moment, The Grand Illusion. It's interesting. I was reading this a little earlier, and I noted this down that seriously, Brandon D. Murphy's book, The Grand Illusion, is like book one is like nothing I've ever read. Brandon, in this book, you state in the beginning of your book, this book is kind of dangerous and subversive text that can play a civilizing and transformative role. The time is ripe for such outlandish material to be circulated en masse because perhaps never in our known history have the masses of mankind been so beaten down, worn out, and disillusioned with the status quo. I mean, is that the main reason you wrote this book?
I guess that's part of it. It's hard to kind of rationalize it because when I read Talbot's book, The Holographic Universe, and then shortly after that, I had my first, I guess, for want of a better term, first mystical experience, of infinite consciousness, and then that really solidified the material in the book and clarified it for me, and showed me, oh, this is actually real. And so, for me, like once I had those experiences, there was no going back. I had this. It's sort of like your life is not your own anymore. It's kind of like you end up on a mission, right? Which is something you can relate to. So I'm not really. I don't feel like I'm. It's like, yeah, I could rationalize it, but it's almost like I didn't have a choice. I had to kind of put that into a book format and explore the subject from as many different angles as possible, so that I could flesh it out for people a little bit.
Oh my God, you sure did that too. And so I am curious, that statement, never before in the history of mankind has mankind been so beaten down, worn out, and disillusioned. Why are we in this place in this world? Why?
I think, yeah, that sentiment aged very well. I mean, it seems to me like we come into this life with, for the most part, most people come into this life with very sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Acute state of spiritual amnesia. and we don't remember what we are, who we are. And so because of that, we have to essentially we live in this sort of delusional state of self identity and self concept that's really very, very off the mark. We're kind of living in sin, so to speak. That's what missing the mark means. To sin is to miss the mark. So we're all kind of living in sin in that sense, because we, for the most part, don't know who we are. Which was why I felt like that was the purpose of the book, was to remind people of what they fundamentally are, who they are. Because when you realize that, unless you're a sociopath, you end up walking a very different kind of a path. Like, you treat people differently. You realize everybody is just another version of yourself. And a lot of the sort of pathological, or let's say the pathologies that affect us and afflict us, greed and avarice and the urge to control people and tyrannize people and all this stuff, that's not possible from a truly connected conscious place. So for me, the solution is at the individual level, the level of the individual remembering themselves.
Yeah, and absolutely. One thing that I also have too, and I'm kind of jumping subjects here real quick, because you have so much that interests me, is you also, on top of that, do something called DNA activation. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's a sound-based modality. It was developed by a guy called Sol Luckman. I'm not sure if you had him on the show yet. So it's actually his system and modality, which he developed after 10 years of being severely vaccine injured. And so he had to come up with a solution to this. And in a nutshell, the solution was this method, which was kind of sort of spontaneously sort of downloaded into his mind. And so I learned about it. I connected with him, I think, in 2010 or 11. While I was finishing off my first book. And he obviously, as an author, he published Conscious Healing. I think it was actually just released. So what we were doing, we were swapping like author reviews, reader reviews. And that was how I connected with him and found out about that. And I was like, wow, this is very profound. So I wanted to learn about it. And as soon as I did, I was like, okay, well, I got to do this. So I did the first sort of activation ceremony on myself. And I noticed some things shift and all this sort of stuff. And from there, I was like, well, I'm going to obviously got to learn the whole system. And then I started offering it to people as a practitioner. So in a nutshell, it's quite an interesting modality.
Well, and it's interesting too. Originally we were scheduled to have our friend Eileen McCusick on here, and she is the purveyor and originator of biofield tuning. So does her tuning fork and the sound therapy fall in line with that DNA activation?
Oh, her method is completely unrelated. It's completely different. She has it's more of, with what she does is more of a therapist type of a setup, an approach. So she'll go into an individual's field, their biofield, with this tuning fork or that tuning fork, and work with the areas of distortion that she picks up. It's more of a therapeutic modality. And it's awesome. It's really good. I was actually, I think, the second person she ever did a remote session on. So I've been blessed to have 2 sessions with her like that, and it's very powerful. It's an excellent modality. Not particularly similar; they're quite dissimilar, the 2 modalities. And actually, she's been through the timeline, the Regenetics method timeline as well. And I had a chat with her about it when we were at Acapulco last year, and she was telling me about how when she hit level 4. After she did the 4th activation, she had this, all her career and financial work-related stuff just blossomed and bloomed, and it was all kind of unleashed. So she had a really interesting experience with it.
Yeah, I've got one of her tuning forks back here. So she of course was on this show a couple years ago, and maybe eventually we'll get you both on this show together. Going back to what you were talking about, separation and everything. I'm a big student of A Course in Miracles, which is non-dualistic spirituality. And your book is about the synthesis of science and spirituality. And now they're saying the same things, that there really is no separation, that there as author Lynn McTaggart talks about, there's only the field and everything is connected together. Yet, I think that's what attracts me to non-dualistic spirituality. It reminds us that this world of duality and separation, it's not real, but it's so hard to get past that when we look, wait, here's my hand and you're telling me this is not real. See, I didn't know, have you ever studied or read A Course in Miracles?
Honestly, I think I started a long time ago, but I never sort of finished it.
Yeah, it's right in line with everything you're talking about, and I know there's religions like Hinduism and Buddhism who have spoken of that, a non-dualistic belief in spiritual understanding and reality for a very, very long time. Well, let's dive back into this more about the things that you do on Truthiverse. Let's find out more about this, what's going on in the world. I mean, the world has been beaten down, suppressed, subjugated, and controlled both mentally and physically. I mean, why does this continue? I mean, it seems to have run through all of mankind's history.
I mean, why haven't we overcome this yet? It's an interesting question. I mean, I think the individual needs to wake up and have at least some level of understanding of who and what they are. And like I said before, that basically is the solution to the problem. But the challenge is how do we facilitate that on a large enough scale that it actually really makes a systemic difference in things? That's a good question. It's like it's all well and good for you and me to talk about it, but how do we encourage or facilitate that process? I mean, there are a number of schools of thought which you would be aware of that, we talk about these different ages, like the different yugas that we're in and going through, and a lot of people seem to agree that we're either leaving the Kali Yuga, the dark age, and then gradually transitioning into the next slightly more enlightened age. So this kind of cyclical view of civilization and time, I think, is worth looking at, because it seems to make a lot of sense. I mean, the Kali Yuga, if you look at the last 2,000 years of man's history, I mean, that is the dark ages. We are very lost. It's very dark indeed.
Yeah, it's amazing that so many of us actually are at this point where we can actually live a decent life, but we're more programmed and controlled than we believe. As a matter of fact, I'm kind of glad you brought this up, that man is on the cusp of a change. And over the last 6 years of this show, I've had many, many mediums, scientific and metaphysical experts, trance channels, a lot of them on this show. They all say that we're on the cusp of a transition from the 3D world of form into the 4D and 5D world. And I mean, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've read a lot around this kind of stuff, and I see this kind of idea thrown around a lot. I've never found it to be super useful in terms of connecting it to everyday experience, or let's just say everyday experience or reality. Like, it tends to be a bit of a fluffy kind of a concept. It's not really super grounded most of the time. It's not that I deny that there's a 4D existence or a 5D existence, but I can guarantee you the next 500 years, 1,000 years are going to, in terms of what this experience looks like, it's very likely going to be very, very similar. We're not going to be ascending off into light bodies and floating away or any of this kind of stuff. Like, I'd like to see a more grounded approach to that type of thinking, to be frank.
I think what you just pointed out is very true, because fluffy topic or on the verge of woo, and I would think that the vast majority, if not the 100% of people living in a body in a 3D, they're saying, what? How are we going to go into 5D? But everything seems to point to that. People like Greg Braden and Bruce Lipton and on and on. People are writing about this and talking about this. But yeah, it is, when you're sitting here in a body and I'm sitting here drinking a cup of coffee, it's really hard to, okay, I'm going to blip off into the 5D. But yeah, it is hard to understand that. But it is exciting to think that it is possible.
Well, there's definitely, I agree that there's definitely a shift in the consciousness, absolutely, and there is an evolution at I think a biological evolution and a conscious evolution that's happening. Like if you look at the kids that are being born now in the last 10, 20 years, you can't deny it. There's, I mean, I've watched kids play video games completely blindfolded, read completely blindfolded, and that's becoming more common. So that as you realize these types of abilities are becoming more common, obviously there's an evolution happening. So we are opening up to other levels or densities of information. If you want to call them 4D or 5D and what have you, that's fine. But we are evolving and adapting. There's no question. So the consciousness of the species is shifting absolutely. So when we talk about going into the next age, um, following the Kali Yuga as we leave it, the human being is going to function differently. At least the ones who don't resist the flow.
Well, the interesting thing too is, we're talking about mankind being on the verge of a transformation into the 5D. Yet, I've had people on here recently, and I know I had mentioned to you in an email about one of my guests, Dean Graves, who just released a book called The Enigma of Consciousness. And he speaks about as man is going through this, there's an increased bifurcation, a split from one side to the other, of as things are going. And I think a real example of that is the recent American presidential election, and its people have really gone over there, and there doesn't seem to be any middle ground on that. And do you think that's a big factor with the splitting of the population into one side or the other?
In what sense?
Well, and just that it might result in more chaos. It seems to be as the light is growing stronger and more powerful, but there's also the dark side that seems to be growing too in the opposition of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like as the light gets brighter, the shadow gets darker and more defined. So we're going to see it more and more. The splitting is not, it's not particularly helpful. I mean, it's not accidental either. I mean, let's be honest, like that is definitely encouraged by certain networks of people, certain parties, bad actors it's a classic distraction strategy. While we're politically divided, for example, we're at each other's throats instead of looking at the real perpetrators, the real, the puppet masters, the people behind the scenes, the hidden hand. It's super. I mean, it's sort of the oldest trick in the book, but we keep falling for it, and it's so unnecessary. Like politics, especially in America. I mean, it seems to be very. America seems to be, I don't know all the rest of the world, in the way they function collectively and their political, situation and the way people see it. But America, I'm relatively familiar with, and it's very interesting kind of a creature because it's like Americans more than almost any other people I can think of see their reality and their experience day to day through a political lens. And the whole political system is so manipulated and so rigged that you can't have any clarity that comes from looking at things like that through that political lens. You're manipulated and controlled if you do it. And, still most people don't seem to have been able to figure that out yet.
Yeah, unfortunately, it does seem to be like that. Living in America, I guess in a certain way, I'm really happy that I don't watch television. Unfortunately, I do see, news stories online and everything. One thing, this may be an interesting thing to talk about, ever since Elon Musk took over Twitter, which is now X, it does seem to be a forum for expression to be unhindered on there. I don't know if you look at that, but it's like it's never been before.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And I always wonder, um, what's the shadow side of that? Like they'll give us this kind of like they'll dangle the carrot, but then soon comes the stick, or we get stuck on the hook, and it's like, well, what's the hook? In someone like Elon Musk who has that kind of transhumanist kind of leaning, I see them as potentially bad actors, who are, people use this term like limited hangout, where it's sort of like, yeah, you're supposed to go and we jump on this bandwagon, hang out here for a while, and this guy looks like the good guy for a while. And I mean, it's interesting because I have to question how much of it's actually really scripted and manipulated versus how much of it just seems to happen kind of organically. But I don't. I like the fact that like Twitter, for example, is, I mean, I don't like the platform. I don't really use it, but at least they've reinstated a bunch of accounts that were censored and shut down. And, they've essentially made a return to freedom of speech. The question is, how long will that last before, maybe your biometric data is required to use it? And, like in Australia, for example, they just passed an act about not allowing under 16s, I think it was, to use social media. And on the face of it, I'm like, well, that's great because social media is super unhealthy for for kids. They shouldn't really be on it. And the dark side of it is, you look at the people who are doing this stuff, and it's like, well, these people are not actually acting in the interests of humanity. There's the next thing coming that is like the quiet part that they don't say out loud about, well, okay, so if you want to be on it, we're going to need all your data, your biometrics, or maybe you'll need your microchip in your wrist or your forehead or something like that. It's never what it seems like with these people.
Yeah, yeah. And it's not also so healthy for adults to peruse that. Being a wild and crazy bachelor, I'll sit here with my cat with a beer at night. I don't have a TV, so unfortunately I'll go on there. And by the time I'm done viewing, I'm just going, holy crap, wait a second, that was pretty convoluting, just turn it off. But the world is seemingly, well, not seemingly, is hypnotized by technology. I mean, we know, I'm sure where you live, where I live, it seems that nobody can walk down the street without having a cell phone in front of their face. And I realize that literally the entire population of the world is hypnotized by this little computer. And and again, I mean, there may be an agenda behind that. Well, I'm sure there is an agenda, but also we all utilize this technology. It's almost impossible to ignore.
Yeah, it is. It's hard, like I'd rather not have a phone, but at the point, the situation I'm in my life, like, I need one. It's as simple as that. I need to have a phone of some sort at least. But yeah, the smartphone thing and, where they want to take it with the transhumanist stuff, and the censorship and the tracking and all that stuff. I mean, it's not going in a good place if we let them take it where they want to take it. But it's up to us to try to snap out of the trance. I mean, like you said, people really are hypnotized by it. Absolutely. I mean, to think that most people can't just take a short walk down the street and look at the sky and enjoy the sunshine, they've got to be looking at the artificial light on the phone. I mean, I I don't understand that. I'm glad, I'm really grateful actually that I was the last generation that was raised without phones and without the computers and the laptops. Like I had a computer when I was like a teenager at home, but we didn't have, we weren't on smartphones and all that stuff. Like it was, if I had a phone later on, it was just to send a quick text message, the old school sort of, you got to press the button 3 times to get the letter you want and all that kind of, that kind of deal. And I'm glad that all the other more advanced stuff wasn't around then, because the effect that it's had on people, it's so crippling. Like socially, it's so crippling. I'm around people, 20-year-olds who can't sit there and not, even as you're supposed to be engaging with each other, they can't not look at the phone. It's like, where are you? Are you here or not? Like, what are you doing? And it's a super unhealthy example for my daughter to see that kind of thing as well. Like, I don't want her to see this kind of behavior at all. Like, that's not something that kids should be modeling, like, and imitating, because what they see in their ages, under 7 years old, like, whatever they see automatically, it's like, this is the program. This is how we act. This is what we do. So it's very hard to shield, my kid from that stuff as well. I do what I can in the home. I try not to let her see me use the phone, all that kind of stuff. But nobody else, like outside the house, seems to have that mentality. So it's difficult, man. I wish people would kind of have a little bit more awareness and intentionality around that stuff.
A couple years ago, I was going through the airport in Los Angeles, LAX, and I had time to go to one of the cafes and get something to eat and have a beer. And two young men sat down next to me, and they were obviously traveling together, and they never once talked, sat across from each other on the phones. I think they were texting each other, but But I wish I was lying when I tell you, I go running outside almost every day of my life, and how many times I've been out in a beautiful park on a summer day, and I never wear earbuds, and how many people coming walking by are on a cell phone or talking with a little white sticks in their ears, and talking, and I go, do you not see how beautiful this day is? No, they're completely oblivious to it.
Yeah, that sucks. And the saddest thing to me, like one of the saddest things I've seen, and I see it heaps, is like at a restaurant, for example, you'll see a family at a table,
Oh yeah.
and everybody, the kids included, are not looking at each other. They're not talking. They're all on their phone doing their own thing. And it's like you've got like an 8-year-old there, and a 12-year-old. That is not appropriate. They should not be on a phone. I'm sorry, they shouldn't be. You're not doing your job as a parent.
Yeah, yeah. Well, observations of the modern world with Brendan D. Murphy right here on World Awakenings. Again, I want to go back. I mean, I just absolutely love your book, The Grand Illusion. One of my favorite all-time books. Let's talk about your new book, book 2 of The Grand Illusion. I know you've been working on that a long time. Is it soon to be published?
I'm kind of hoping we can do like, hopefully the first 3 months or the first quarter of next year,
Okay.
2025. Hopefully, if it all goes to plan, then yeah. I mean, it's got to be professionally edited, ideally, and then you got to put the actual book format together and all that sort of stuff. So that's a process. But yeah, I'm just kind of whittling it down now. I'm trying to just get rid of material that doesn't need to be in there. Some of it I've taken chapters out that can go into a future book. It's just so long. So yeah, I'm working on it and just refining it. But it's definitely gonna blow people away. I mean, if someone liked the first book, I think this one's actually better. I think this one is really going to blow people away in the best way possible.
Yeah, and I can't wait to it. It might give me an excuse to travel to Mexico and have you sign it. So yeah, wow, that's exciting. And you say it's as long or longer than the first book?
Yeah, it's going to be longer. I'm hoping not too much longer though, because that's a long enough book.
Explore, obviously, it's going to explore areas you didn't touch in the first book, right?
Yeah, it's going to go deeper into some of the areas that I just sort of glossed over or touched on briefly, because it's very heavily focused on afterlife research, non-physical existence, the concepts of like the higher aspects, higher self, and yeah, reincarnation, how these types of things work. There are parts of it that are a little bit more technical, but yeah, it's merging a lot of different streams of research to show the connections between them and to develop a picture that moves beyond the individual, like this idea or that idea. If we bring it together and transcend it, what do we see then? What do we see from a higher level here? So yeah, I mean, I haven't seen anybody do a book like this yet, so I think it's pretty unique. It's definitely comprehensive.
Well, and two, you're talking about afterlife. That's interesting because I've had a number of people on my show with near-death experiences. One of the most interesting ones was Bill Letson, and he was a EMT who had a wild and crazy near-death experience, and all of them seemed to just transition effortlessly into the next realm. And they all come back with the same story of nothing but light and unconditional love and forgiveness. And many of them they were given the opportunity, if it was a near-death experience, to come back and continue their purpose on this level in a 3D form. But it really is interesting. There seems to be no diversity of these near-death experiences. They all talk about it. It's just beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, there are some mixed sort of accounts. Well, there is a mixture because not everybody has necessarily a super pleasant one, but the vast majority of them are kind of what you've described. So, yeah, more or less what you've outlined, and people generally don't want to come back from that other that other realm or state of consciousness. It's much more enjoyable. So in various cases, they'll be told by a voice that it's not their time yet, they've got to return, or they meet a being of light who sends them back, or perhaps family members that are deceased who are there to stop them from crossing over properly and say, it's not your time yet. Other times there's not any such communication. They're just sort of suddenly back in their body. But yeah, overwhelmingly positive experiences. There are some less enjoyable ones, but it's mostly to do with the state of consciousness that somebody has at the time, the kind of person that they are.
Yeah.
So if you have somebody who's a really kind of crappy human, they're likely to have a kind of a hellish type experience. And sometimes it will start in a kind of a hellish condition and then move into a much more enjoyable, blissful one. And it's always in that order. It's always, if there is an unpleasant aspect, it's always first and it's followed by the pleasant aspect. It's never in reverse. So, if the Christian, fundamentalists were right about, oh, well, if their ideas about heaven and hell were correct, it wouldn't happen like that. Like people's experiences would be different. If you found yourself in a hellish type experience, that would be it. You don't go to heaven after that, you're in hell, right? According to their simplistic thinking, but that's not how it works. So it's reassuring in that sense. Most people have great experiences, and when we look at the other strains of research from other people, like the out of body explorers and this type of stuff, life between lives, regression therapy, thousands of people have done this kind of thing, and the reports are overwhelmingly very positive, and very similar too.
And we probably can read more about it in the Grand Illusion book too. Again, referring to my previous guest, Dean Graves, we were talking about different dimensions, and that he says it's not that the difference in dimensions is a mile; it's more like inches. That they're actually, layered much closely together than we realize. And I think maybe, perhaps, these near-death experiences are probably a good example of that.
Well, I mean, yeah, every so-called dimension is embedded within the next one. So there's a lot of, if you like, overlap. In an esoteric kind of model like we get from, say, Theosophy, you've got the physical Earth, then you have the etheric Earth, which is a little bit larger. Then you have the astral Earth, which is larger again. Then you have the mental Earth, which is larger again. So it goes on like this. You have just basically nested dimensions nested within one another. But the difference is with the higher dimensions, theoretically, there are extra spatial dimensions as well. So they have an extension in a direction that we can't barely even imagine in 3D. We're used to XYZ axes, but they have XYZ and another one, and then another one, and so it gets very difficult to try to visualize that. But yeah, we're embedded in it. That's not a new idea at all. So it's just a shift in the state of awareness that allows you to go to the next so-called dimension.
Yeah, and this is why I love talking to you, Brendan, because you can converse intelligently on topics that most people don't even consider. And how many people sit here and talk about the different dimensions and things like that. But it is important. This is why you do Truthiverse. This is why I do World Awakenings, and it's much needed. I think it's all part about the main theme of this show. Why now are the people of the world more than ever awakening to all things spiritual, metaphysical, and enlightening? And it's time. And I think the spread of technology, again, you and I grew up in a time where it wasn't so prevalent, but now, despite the negative things of the internet and all the technology, it is enhancing the awakening of the world at lightning speed. If somebody was sitting in an Aborigine in the outback in Australia who never had a touch, was able to gain any of this information, now it's bam, right there.
Yeah, and that's the double-edged sword is, it's like it's setting us free on a collective level in some ways, and on an individual level, it's enslaving us as well. Because people become addicted to it and they become controlled by the device. Instead of using it as a tool, they get used by it. But you're right, and that's the internet's kind of an extension of the human sort of neural system, and now we have this collective neural system, the electronic neural system, which is allowed us to disseminate information that it has been deliberately suppressed for a long time. So it's this rising tide that is not going. It's not going to be beaten back. It's unstoppable at this point. I would think so. The awakening that's happening could get quicker. It could become exponential if it's not already.
Yeah, and we are talking to Brendan D. Murphy, what do you call yourself? Freedom hacker and truth addict, and you really are. I mean, the world is blessed to have you, Brendan. You know, I follow you and all that you do, and everything since I've had you on the show 6 years ago and discovered your first book. I mean, it's opened up much in my own life, and I think you'll never realize the positive effect that you have had on the world. Yeah, it's kind of the old butterfly effect. If a butterfly flaps its wings on the shore of Japan, does it create a tsunami in California? You'll never know. And I think what you have done and continue to do is just a beautiful awakening for planet Earth and its people. And I thank you for that, man.
Well, thank you. It's really kind of you to say that. I appreciate that a lot, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, keep doing it. And so I know you have your own website. Your website address is just Brendan D. Murphy.
Yep. .com. Yep.
.com, and you have you do some workshops, and do you have any coming up that you care to?
I don't have anything scheduled, but if people want to learn about that, the DNA activation stuff that we talked about earlier, there's a free masterclass they can go to, and it's at evolveyourself.live.
Yeah, I think you just did one. I was looking at that. Yeah.
Yeah. I do sort of an occasional worldwide buy donation ceremonies for level one. So yeah, I don't know, we may do another one in January. I don't have it scheduled, but if people don't want to wait to find out, just go and look at the free masterclass. There's an offer at the end that's the very, very heavily discounted offer anyway. So it's worth a look. And I just want to also mention that if people actually want to check out book one, because it is available, obviously, as you've shown, the cheapest copies are on my website. Like, it's more expensive to go through Amazon, so don't go through Amazon, go to my website.
There it is. And of course, you could do like I did. I found it in a used bookstore. And you know what? I've written books and I found them in a used bookstore too. So there's nothing to feel bad about that. So, Brendan, you're amazing. Thank you, brother, for being on World Awakenings. And like I said to you before we came on, man, you are a long way from Sydney.
Yeah, brother, I feel you on that. But yeah, I want to thank you too for doing what you do and having such a great positive outlook, and for the support that you offer and your general contribution. The energy you bring is awesome. So back at you.
This has been another episode of World Awakenings, the fast track to enlightenment with host Carl Gruber, a certified law of attraction life coach. We welcome you to tune in to each and every episode of World Awakenings as we open your mind, your heart, and your eyes to the fact that the world's population is now, more than ever, awakening to the truth of all things spiritual, metaphysical, and enlightening, and just how much they play an all-important role in our moment-to-moment daily life. Much love and light to you, my friend, and thank you for tuning into World Awakenings.